give my opening?
At the very beginning, if you wish, but I'll just introduce you then, and then I'll the general introduction first, and then call you in.
Excellent.
Great. Hello, everybody. My name is John Dennehy, and on behalf of the Bussola Institute in Brussels, I am delighted to welcome everyone to today's webinar on the topic of Saudi Arabia's G20 Presidency. The theme for the G20 Presidency of 2020 is realizing opportunities of the 21st century for all. And as you will all know, this theme was announced in late 2019 at what was then regarded as a time of increasing uncertainty in the geopolitical and economic situation of the globe. And speaking to the agenda theme, His Highness King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, the King of Saudi Arabia and custodian of the two holy mosques, emphasized that there was a pressing need to empower people to pave the way for a better future for all and to strive for sustainable economic policies to safeguard the planet Earth. The intention of the Saudi G20 presidency agenda was to be forward-looking and to adopt a bold, long-term vision that makes the most of the current wave of innovation and technology to shape new frontiers. The agenda for the 2020 presidency, which will be described to you in more detail in a while, but it's set out under 3 themes. First theme, empowering people, is about creating the conditions in which all people, especially women and youth, can live decently, work and thrive. The second theme is safeguarding the planet through fostering collective efforts to protect our global future. And the third theme is shaping new frontiers through adopting long-term and bold strategies to share the benefits of innovation and technological advancement. However, early in 2020, the totally unexpected onset of the devastating COVID-19 global pandemic turned the world as we all knew it completely upside down. This disastrous pandemic continues to impact enormously on economies, on people, on societies, and on culture right across the globe, and is placing an immeasurable shock on the global systems for trade, travel, and health. It is also impacting significantly on the activities of the G20 presidency. The 3 themes of the agenda, when set out by the Saudi Arabian presidency, were universally regarded as of central importance as we headed into 2020. However, a few short months later, they unexpectedly took on an even greater significance, in my view, arising from the many frightening dimensions of the new world crisis brought about by the pandemic. In response to this, the G20 presidency held an emergency summit in March to organize a coordinated global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout the following months, the 3 themes in the G20 agenda came to have an even greater significance, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has demonstrated great resilience in taking on the many additional challenges of holding the G20 presidency in such turbulent times, while also maintaining the momentum of the G20 process itself. During the year, there have been many G20 ministerial level meetings across a wide range of portfolios, and several other organizational groups, such as the B20, the T20, and the Empower Alliance. And these have met and produced very worthwhile reports and studies. As we approach next week's very significant G20 Virtual Leaders Summit under the Presidency of Saudi Arabia, the Bussola Institute is hosting this webinar to explore the progress made by the G20 Presidency towards achieving their goal of realizing opportunities of the 21st century for all. And all of this in the face of an unprecedented worldwide pandemic. During the webinar, we will discuss how the Presidency's ambitious program to empower people, particularly women and youth, to live, work and thrive, to take concrete actions to safeguard the planet, and to adopt long-term strategies to use and share the benefits of innovation have found expression in the kingdom itself. We will also ask if there have been benefits for the Gulf region as a whole and how the G20 presidency has impacted on relationships with Europe and the broader international community. We are very fortunate to have with us here today Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Riam, two key members of Saudi Arabia's G20 team, both of whom are directly and centrally involved with the presidency on a day-to-day basis. They will give us a first-hand account of what has been and is being done to realize opportunities, not only in response to the pandemic, but also in ensuring a more resilient and better prepared international system for the future. In addition, our other two hugely experienced external experts, Dr. Peter and Dr. Sami, will address the global impact of the G20 presidency as we all grapple with these very uncertain and turbulent times. In addition to providing their insights on the pivotal role of promoting multilateralism, human solidarity, and global cooperation, and how investing in technology and innovation will contribute hugely to our worldwide recovery. Before we start our formal proceedings, and we'll do that in a couple of minutes, His Excellency Ambassador Saad Alarify, head of the mission of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to the European Union, has requested an opportunity to say some words of thanks this morning. So, Your Excellency, over to you at this stage.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, Mr. John Dennehy and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you for hosting this webinar to discuss the important topic regarding Saudi Arabia G20 presidency. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Abdullah AlHasan and Dr. Riam Al-Rassi and the G20 Secretariat for their hard work and their great efforts pushing forward for a very successful G20 summit this year. As a Saudi citizen, I feel very, very proud of my country leading the G20. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is one of the youngest countries in the G20, undertaking a huge economic and social transformation for its people. A country with a desire for action and progress, utilizing its presidency with openness and pride to realize the opportunity of the 21st century for all. This year, with unprecedented circumstances, the G20 has been leading the fight against COVID-19 and its many negative consequences. This has been a tremendous task for coordinating efforts of health system and vaccine research to fighting for financial stability. It has involved working intensively with our fellow G20 partners, international organizations, civil society, and the business community. Having seen this year's G20 program, I have become amazed by the level of ambition and commitment. The agenda includes various important topics from health, education, tourism, youth and women empowerment, to protecting the environment, digital economy, technology, and innovation. These are some of the many issues of the agenda on which the G20 helps push the world in the right direction. With Saudi Arabia presidency coming to an end, I look forward to a successful G20 Leaders Summit on the 21st and the 22nd of this month, with an outcome that will be beneficial for the whole world. I am very interested to hear your distinguished guests' presentations and discussion today, and I wish you all very fruitful webinar. Thank you once again, dear John.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for joining us. We'll start with Dr. Abdullah. Before our speakers start, I've asked everybody to try and limit themselves to 5 or 6 minutes. I know it passes very quickly. It will give us the opportunity then to extend a bit more with some, maybe some questions and some discussion afterwards. Dr. Abdullah AlHasan is Saudi Arabia's G20 Sous Sherpa and Executive Director of Policy for the Saudi Arabia G20 Presidency. And Dr. Abdullah has had a very distinguished career to date, and I'm sure an even more distinguished one ahead of him. He has worked for the International Monetary Fund, for the Saudi Arabian Monetary Agency, and is regarded as a very renowned economist, specializing in quantitative economics and financial analysis. And Dr. Abdullah will discuss the overall agenda of Saudi Arabia's G20 presidency, including the opportunities and challenges posed by this year's global pandemic, as well as the opportunities and potential outcomes that will arise from next week's Riyadh summit. Over to you, Dr. Abdullah, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, John. Good afternoon to you and to the guests, and thank you for Bussola Institute for the kind invitation to speak today. Let me first start to take this opportunity to extend my thanks and the gratitude on behalf of the Saudi G20 Presidency, the G20 members and invited countries, as well as to the international organizations for their endless support in making our presidency succeed. Basically, today I will be speaking about 3 things: the Saudi presidency agenda, the G20 response to the pandemic, and then conclude on the way forward to the Riyadh summit. With regard to the first one, the Kingdom G20 presidency agenda, both John and His Excellency Saad, they touch upon the presidency agenda. I would say almost a year ago, last year, early in November, we started our presidency under the forward-looking theme of realizing opportunities of the 21st century for all, with the 3 ambitious aims of empowering people, safeguarding the planet, and shaping a new frontier. While the agenda has been to some extent affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect on the global health situation and the global economy, those 3 aims remain more relevant than ever. We continue to push for them as they are driving forces behind our efforts to shape a future that is more inclusive, more sustainable, and more resilient. When it comes to the G20 response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the G20 leaders spared no time to react quickly. In less than 2 weeks after the WHO declared COVID-19 to be a pandemic, the Saudi presidency and His Majesty convened an extraordinary summit on March 26th, where leaders agreed on an immediate response which was unprecedented in its scope and ambition, demonstrating that the G20 can meet in times of major crisis and lead the international community in taking decisive action. Let me give you just a few examples. Until now, G20 members injected what amounted to over 11 trillion into the global economy. At the beginning of the crisis, they have injected over 21 billion to support the international fight against the pandemic, including the hunt for a vaccine. They have extended debt relief to the poorest countries through the debt service suspension initiative that would allow 73 eligible countries of low-income countries to reallocate around $14 billion toward their imminent health and financial needs, and committing to ensure the flow of vital medical supplies and the critical agriculture product across border. While we tackle the challenge of today, it's critical that the world learn the lesson and look into the future. The pandemic, as we have seen, has uncovered the vulnerabilities in our system. We need to recover stronger and be better prepared for if something like this to happen in the future again. The Saudi presidency, therefore, has continued to work to adapt its G20 agenda and put several initiatives to ensure that the recovery are at the heart of the global discussion. For example, in the health area, the G20 leaders made a commitment to address pandemic preparedness with a view to establish a global initiative on pandemic preparedness and response, because COVID-19 is not the last pandemic. We have seen many of them over the last 3 decades. The number and severity of those pandemics have increased, and we are likely to see more in the future. And the G20, given its leading role globally, is putting on the table an initiative to reduce the and mitigate the effect of the future pandemics. The recovery is also an opportunity to create the condition for a more sustainable economy that work for both people and the planet. Therefore, the Saudi presidency proposed, and thankfully the G20 endorsed, the circular carbon economy platform as a sustainable, pragmatic, and cost-effective approach for achieving ambitious climate goals and for ensuring cleaner, more sustainable, and affordable energy systems. When it comes to the environment, nature-based solutions have a great potential to help solve the environmental challenges. Around 12 million hectares of land are lost annually due to land degradation, including deforestation. Therefore, the G20 has the potential to lead the international community in working toward minimizing land degradation and deforestation to conserve biodiversity. With regard to the coral reef, which represent around 25 to 50% of the world marine life, Saudi Arabia is advancing an initiative in coral reef to conserve them. Finally, trade remains to be a key driver of the global economic recovery, and the G20, thankfully, they agree on the Riyadh initiative on the future of the WTO, which aim to share a set of common principles that guide the reform process with the aim of better equipping the multilateral trading system for the challenges of the present as well as the future. So let me conclude on the way forward to the Riyadh summit. The Saudi presidency will have a strong overarching focus on protecting life and livelihood, restoring growth and recovering stronger. We would like to send 2 messages, both in the Riyadh summit and the Riyadh declaration, a message of hope and a message of reassurance. By focusing on rising to the challenge together and taking immediate action to combat this pandemic, such as ensuring universal and equitable access to vaccine, empowering people by ensuring an inclusive recovery that tackles inequalities, safeguarding the planet and ensuring sustainability at the heart of the recovery, and finally, building a resilient and long-lasting recovery by ensuring a strong foundation for the future through harnessing the benefits of digital technologies. Let me conclude with this word. The G20 presidency is a great responsibility that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has taken with pride, humility, and strong determination to achieve lasting results. The unprecedented health and economic impact of the COVID-19 have made the task of leading G20 this year even more challenging. But with the support of the G20 nation and the broader international community, We are confident that the Riyadh Summit will deliver a very positive outcome that would restore hope to the people of the world in these challenging times. We will strive to overcome the pandemic and lay the foundation for a better future that realizes the opportunities of the 21st centuries for all. Again, it has been a pleasure to be here among you and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah, for what is a very positive, clear and focused presentation. And I'll come back to you with one or two questions later on, hoping we have the time, and I'm sure we will. Dr. Riam Al Rassi is a policy advisor at the Saudi Arabia G20 Secretariat. And also she's file head of Tourism Working Group, Women's Empowerment as a Cross-Cutting Topic, and the Empower Alliance. She has previously held positions at the UNHCR and the Saudi Human Rights Mission. Dr. Riam, it's a great pleasure to introduce you, and you're most welcome. So over to you now.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone is safe and well. And thank you, Mr. John Dennehy and Bussola Institute, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today. I will be focusing on how the Saudi G20 presidency has included women's empowerment in its agenda. Women's empowerment is critical to the G20's overall mission, as women's full inclusion in the labor markets has the potential to add as much as $28 trillion to global annual GDP. And as Dr. Abdullah has mentioned, a key aim of the Saudi G20 presidency agenda is empowering people, prioritizing women and youth. Therefore, women's empowerment is an overarching, cross-cutting priority on our agenda. We have established a women's empowerment team that is dedicated to support and ensure the advancement of women and girls across the multiple topics relating to the finance track, as well as development, employment, health, education, agriculture, anti-corruption, energy, digital economy, tourism, and trade and investment. This year, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the challenges of gender inequality globally and has made this conversation relevant now more than ever, as the impact on women economically and socially has been extensive. The Women's Empowerment Team worked with the working groups to research and highlight the effects of COVID-19 on women throughout the year. And while the crisis has impacted women substantially, it also provides us an opportunity to rebuild a more gender-balanced world. Therefore, the G20 committed to reducing the wider impact of COVID-19 and have taken key steps towards women's empowerment, including the G20 labor and employment ministers recognized the disproportionate negative impact of COVID-19 on both women's paid and unpaid work. They committed to ensure that the recent decreases in women's labor force participation do not become structural, and that the quality job growth benefits all people, with a focus on youth, not in education, employment, or training, especially young women. With a focus on enhancing access to opportunity, policy options were discussed in the finance track to enhance women's participation and economic empowerment, aiming to level the playing field, such as removing gender-based legal restrictions and discrimination in the workplace, as well as eliminating the wage gap. In addition, and to further enhance access to opportunities for all, the G20 supported access to quality early childhood education for girls, reducing the digital gender gap, enabling women-owned MSMEs, and advancing digital financial inclusion for women. The Saudi G20 presidency further encouraged and supported the establishment of the Private Sector Alliance for the empowerment and progression of women's economic representation. As you so wonderfully put it, the Empower Alliance. The alliance is comprised of G20 countries' private sector representatives and their government points of contact. It's led by the private sector and advocates for the advancement of women in leadership in the private sector. So in conclusion, women's empowerment is a core priority for the 2020 G20 Saudi presidency. It's been considered holistically across the multiple work streams, as well as through the advancement of the Empower Alliance. We've built upon the existing momentum from the previous presidencies to create meaningful impact, empowering women and girls, and are working to ensure that the effects of COVID-19 do not become structural. We all have a vital role to play in advancing women's empowerment. Thank you so much all for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Riam. That was absolutely wonderful. And I'll have again a few questions come back to you in a while when all the speakers have finished. Dr. Peter Cruz is the Austrian delegate for North Africa, the Middle East, and the Gulf region at the Austrian Permanent Representation to the European Union. Peter, who was born in the beautiful city of Vienna, graduated from the Vienna Diplomatic Academy and has held many postings across the world on behalf of his country, and indeed became head of unit for EU institutions at the Foreign Ministry. He has been centrally involved in many negotiations and conferences, including indeed the intergovernmental conference negotiating the Treaty of Lisbon. Peter is a very, very good friend of Bussola's, and indeed has attended very many of our events and activities over the past couple of years. So Peter, it's a great pleasure to welcome you this morning, and I hand over to you now.
Thank you, John. Thank you for this invitation, and welcome to everybody. From my perspective as an EU member state, the G20 Presidency of Saudi Arabia is, of course, a very special event and a very special year. It's the first presidency of Saudi Arabia in the G20, and the program indeed also seen sort of from the outside, because Austria is not a part of the G20, albeit indirectly, because the EU takes part. But it's a very ambitious program. It's a program that shows the openness that has actually been observed by us over the past few years of Saudi Arabia, and also it's interesting from the point of view of the Arab countries, because it's the first time that a country from a member state of the League of Arab States is at the helm of the G20, which is called upon actually to answer to challenges that may sometimes erupt actually unexpectedly, as happened this year. And it's of course all the more difficult for a presidency that is the first time that sort of assumes this role to come to terms with such a challenge of a global scale. So therefore, from our side, a great interest in the presidency and the program. We are very impressed also with the broad range of engagement groups and their topics, because this again is a sign of the openness that Saudi Arabia shows with this program. And we hope that the presidency year is the starting point of a development that will trigger many positive effects in the region and beyond, but also at home, and that the implementation sort of will be possible in the years to come. Because for us, I think the most interesting thing about it is that a process was started and that this can continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. I now hand over to Dr. Sami Marhom. Sami is a professor at the Free University in Brussels, so a city and he knows well. And he's also the Director of Strategy and Research at the Dubai Future Foundation. Dr. Sami was the founding director of INSEAD's Innovation and Policy Initiative in Abu Dhabi and a senior lecturer at INSEAD. During his lifetime, he has been a researcher, an academic, policy analyst, and an advisor, and indeed has worked for the Austrian Institute of Technology, for the OECD in Paris, the Netherlands Organization for Applied Scientific Research, and indeed the European Commission's think tank. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Sami this morning, and Sami will discuss matters related to the economic and innovation dimensions of the G20 activities, and how investing in technology and innovation will contribute hugely to so many aspects of our worldwide recovery. Over to you now, Sami. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John, for this introduction. And thank you, Bussola Institute, for the invitation. And very good to meet the distinguished panel members. I really enjoyed listening to all of you. Both Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Riam have mentioned inclusiveness and structural barriers or impediments as long-lasting effect of the corona or the COVID-19 crisis and the role of the G20, and especially as it happened under the Saudi leadership of the G20. And I think this is a very good point or access point for me to say something about the role of technology in this regard. All of you and our audience would agree that technology has come to play a determining part in the ability of people, individual workers, students, service providers to access services and to deliver them. So for those of us who don't have that access to technology, who don't have access to a laptop, to broadband, to a 3G network, high-speed internet connection, I have access, but for those of us who don't have that access, they would have left out completely out of the rescue packages, the solutions, the ability to continue to engage and participate in economic life in society. We can imagine the trouble that one would go through under a lockdown if they did not have access to a credit card or to an e-payment facility or to the internet or to a smartphone or to an app, or if they were not even able to use it. A lot of the elderly, for instance, they would have a smartphone, but they don't really know how to make use of much of it. So all these factors, the cost, the availability, the cost of access to technology, the availability of the technology, the infrastructure for it, the skills to use it, the savviness in using it, both from the user, the side, so the consumer, but also the student, the worker, the employer, and from the producer side, with all the retail shops that were not on any digital platform. They had no ability to sell their products, to market it, to reach out to their clients. They were shut down completely. They lost all their income. We can imagine then, we can begin to understand how important technology has become as a determining factor between those who had the resilience, who could develop resilience against the COVID-19, and those who don't. But this also, the silver lining of the crisis is that it had drawn our attention to the technology scarcity that is that depicts the world around us. So the G20, it represents almost 50% of the world's poor, 85% of the world economy. There's a lot, more than 75% of world trade. So that's exactly the forum, the place where tackling the issue of technology scarcity can take place in order to bring on board almost 50% of world population on board of the modern economy, so that they can enjoy better access to healthcare, to education, to jobs, to trade. You could be based in a small rural place in Egypt or in Lebanon, and you would be able, through digital platforms, to trade and sell your goods and services around the world. Without that connection, without that access to technology, without affording access to technology, you would be left behind in poverty, in weaker education systems, in poorer healthcare systems. So technology is indeed key to inclusiveness and key to combating emerging or existing, in fact, structural problems that Dr. Riam referred to a couple of times, that keep the poor and the rich richer. So technology has been and continue to be a main dividing factor, a factor that play an important role in the distribution of wealth, in the creation of value, in the capturing of the value that we collectively create, it makes it possible for people in the lower strata of income to experience social mobility by gaining access to better education, to jobs, to commerce. And that's something that I don't feel that we collectively around the world, governments, businesses, have managed to deal with effectively yet, which denies businesses in particular with a lot of opportunity for growth. There is a massive markets out there, billions of people, hundreds and thousands of towns and villages that we have not been able to reach, that they could have been our customers, but we failed to reach them, to sell them our products and services, and to engage with them and to trade with them, and also for them to sell us. And that has that leaves a big gap in the world economy, and the prospect of returning to growth, to economic growth in the post COVID-19 era, which I hope is around the corner now that everyone is talking about the vaccines. I hope that indeed, as of mid-2021, we will kick off our economies and begin to address these structural problems that both our colleagues on the panel have touched upon. I don't know if I talked too long already, but I thought this is a lot of good points were raised already by the speakers, and that technology fits in nicely to explain how those structural problems and how inclusiveness can be enhanced using technology.
Thank you, Sammy. I will come back to you again, because you have raised several issues there that I'd like to just pursue a little bit with you. I'll return, and maybe I'll ask one question of each one to begin with, and then we'll work our way through it as time permits. Dr. Abdullah, as somebody myself who has run a presidency as part of the European Union, an education presidency some years ago, I have always found that, like most multilateral meetings, the formal part of it is very important, the formal gatherings, the formal meetings. But the ability to meet and discuss matters on the sidelines is also very important. Over a coffee, over lunch, a chat, as you walk along the corridor or so on. As so many of the G20 events this year had to be moved online, has the ability to meet informally maybe and discuss innovative solutions been affected, or have you found ways around it?
Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, at the beginning, we thought that it would be challenging to have the meetings via online platform. But as you know, the technologies always surprise us in terms of their benefits, and we were very agile to adapt to those technologies immediately as soon as of early March, where we start to hold at the beginning of the crisis hyper meetings, because some countries were able to visit the kingdom. But then after the closure of the borders, we moved our meetings 100% to be online. And we continue to hold those meetings, not only the official G20 meetings, but also the other side events meetings. And we continue to have the negotiation online. It makes it even more important to engage bilaterally, to try to sort issues more and more at the bilateral and trilateral. And sometimes we have, when we hold the official G20 meetings at the multilateral level, we were able to finish the working group meetings, the ministerial one. We negotiate many of the ministerial communiques using the digital platform. So we found that the technologies, they serve us well. But that does not substitute for the in-person meetings for the G20 delegate to visit the country, because the G20 meetings is not only about conducting the business of the G20, but also more about showcasing the country itself. As you know, in all the previous G20 presidency meetings will be held in around 7 to 10 cities. We would love to have all the G20 delegates to come to experience, I mean, the Saudi cuisine, to interact with the people. We were lucky that many of them they did from December to early March, but unfortunately that did not continue until the end of the year. But the invitation is still open for them to come anytime.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Riam, bearing in mind, I suppose, the great diversity of the G20 membership, can you give us some examples of how you worked with the Empower Alliance to influence social and cultural perspectives impacting on the empowerment of women? You know, could you give us some practical example of how this has worked for you?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, as I mentioned, the Empower Alliance is a private sector-led alliance that was launched last year during the Osaka Summit to advocate for the advancement of women in the private sector. We were very honored and had the privilege of further advancing and establishing this alliance during the Saudi presidency. They convened 4 virtual meetings. With over, as you mentioned, representatives from all over 24 countries and over 50 participants in each meeting, as well as, of course, international organizations such as the ILO, the OECD, and then we also had our civil society, so the W20, the B20, and then they interacted with organizations such as the Women's Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative and the 30% Club. Bearing all that in mind, there were very diverse views, very diverse barriers, but I think women in leadership positions transcend barriers at this point, because despite the progress that has been made globally by women in paid and unpaid work, in education and positions in the labor market remain very different from men's. They are constrained by legal, institutional barriers throughout, and their underrepresentation limits the presence of their voices in important decisions and deprives the girls and young women of strong role models. I think that was felt by all of the women, all of the Empower members. They were all chosen because of their advocacy of women, and in the end, during their final meeting, they released an Empower Private Sector Representative Statement to showcase their progress to the G20 leaders, and they had a pledge by companies towards a further commitment to increase women in leadership positions. And since its release last month, the pledge has over 40 signatories and encompasses over 1.2 million employees. So it was a very, very successful alliance.
That's a great example. So thank you very much indeed. I go to maybe to Peter now. Peter, the Saudi G20 presidency agenda emphasizes the need for greater attention to the benefits of multilateralism. In your opinion, has multilateralism suffered even more as a consequence of COVID?
It's a very interesting question, John. As a matter of fact, I mean, we have seen over the past decades this development towards globalization. At the same time, maybe some of the countries who triggered it have become increasingly tired of the development, but nonetheless, it is there. We live in a globalized world that is extremely interconnected, and of course, this calls for a multilateral approach, a natural answer to the development. And of course, the pandemic in the beginning saw countries more focused sort of on solving the problem at home, trying to sort of shut themselves off, to try to find their own solutions. But the logic of a pandemic has it that as everybody is concerned, it is better to tackle it together. So I think the efforts of Saudi Arabia's G20 presidency to support multilateralism actually chimed in very well to this challenge that came all of a sudden and needed to be addressed urgently. So I think actually that in the long run, the pandemic will strongly reinforce the conviction that we have to go about global challenges globally, and of course in a multilateral manner. That's as far as I can say. And also I would like to add a little bit to what Dr. Sami Marhom said. Very interesting. to see this growing importance of the digital, as he explained, but at the same time, inequalities are growing. And part of the problem is that states will need to try to find ways of addressing these inequalities. And for this, they will need means. So I think the big challenge for the future will also be to see about taxation as a means to get the funds that are necessary to address the inequalities. And here with digital, sort of big digital enterprises, we still have a big problem coming, because here the answer will also need to be an answer we develop together. Thank you very much.
Yes, and even building on that and on the rebuilding of global economies, maybe Sammy, I'll ask you a question that would relate to health. I mean, every country recognizes health as a public good, but the COVID crisis has brought home to us the critical role also, the very critical role that health plays in the global economy. How can we reinforce the importance of health as a critical driver for long-term global economic growth? And in a way, what message should the G20 be sending out from its presidency meeting in a week's time on this issue?
Yeah, thank you for this question, John. If you've noticed in the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis and the beginning of the lockdown, countries like Japan, Germany, Korea, and China, but even the US as well, that are characterized by the high level of robotics deployment. So they have their large manufacturing countries that are known and characterized by making big use of robotics. These countries, they shut down before other countries. The manufacturing plants shut down too, despite the high level of robotization, the high density of robotics use. We used to think that through automation and the use of robotics, we would be able to continue to run our economic activities uninterrupted during times of a crisis when humans are not around. And what we learned is that without humans, without human agency, as economists and sociologists call it, without human agency, there is no world economy, because you could produce as much products as you want, but without a human out there to request it, to be able to consume it, to see it, to know what it is, there will be no customer waiting at the end of the pipeline, so that production will have to stop. So without health, there is no human agency, there is no world economy, there's no prosperity, there is no trade, no social life as we know it, right? So health is important for economic growth. It should be a central element and a central focus of policies and policymakers all over the world. When stimulus packages are designed, they should focus, they should put human agency at the center of it. They should consider what kind of technologies, including medicines and medications and vaccines, but also masks and chairs and robots and drones, sensors, anything you can think of, what kind of technologies we need to develop so that can in the future continue to enhance human agency and to protect humans and their health from risks and threats and vulnerabilities that might render them obsolete, that might lock them in their homes without the ability to participate fully and productively in economic life. So if there's anything that we have, well, two things I should say that we have learned now from the COVID-19 crisis is the centrality of health and human agency to economic activity, despite all the talk about automation, AI, and robotics. And secondly, the importance of technology to enable and enhance human agency. So when we think about AI, automation, robotics, we should think about them in the context of how they can enhance, protect, and extend human agency, because this is the core of economic activity, trade, and how we deal with each other, from inclusiveness to growth, So inclusiveness should not be taken as a form of altruism. It's not something nice to do. It's something that is must to do, because we have, with including more people in economic life, that we have bigger markets, we can grow faster, we can innovate more, we can have more entrepreneurs. So it's a form of collective good. Just if I wanted to just add a few things, just to give you a sense of the size of the challenge. According to World Bank data, 40% of the population in Tunisia and 40% of the population in Morocco would have to spend almost half of their income, monthly income or annual income, to get high-speed internet. So this gives you an idea of the disparity. Maybe half of the population in these countries don't even have access to banking and financial institution services. The same goes to Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt. So without having the ability to make an online payment, how would you be able to enroll in a Coursera course, right? Or to enroll in a Udacity course? Let alone to watch a movie on Netflix or to download the music. I know that some retailers have invented the cash on door as a solution. You could do that for ordering, a bottle of milk perhaps, but you cannot do that to consume educational materials, media materials, intangibles over the net. So we have a host of problems here that can be solved by technology that are and will enhance a human agency, a human ability to continue be an active, productive member in the economy. And now we're talking about the economy because G20 is about the 20 biggest economies, right? But for participating in social life in general. So technology and health go hand in hand, and they should be central to all public policies and policy interventions around the world, particularly the G20, because of what they represent and what they stand for in terms of the world economy.
Thank you very much, Sami. Dr. Abdullah, if I can come back to you for a minute again, and let's take a look now at the legacy of your presidency in the medium to long term. And as we all know, the impact of COVID will extend well beyond 2020. How can the initiatives, the great initiatives of the Saudi G20 presidency, continue to influence global cooperation into the future, in your view?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. This is a very good question. I mentioned in the opening remarks a few initiatives. One of them, which is very immediate, the debt service suspension initiative. That is, as we know, has been extended a few days ago by 6 months. There will be also another ministerial meeting by this Friday, also looking at a common framework for supporting the low-income countries. So this is a legacy issue that will continue for many years by supporting the low-income countries. Another example is our initiative when it comes to the future of the WTO and the reform. As we know, the reforms is not intended to be happening within the G20, but the G20 is a political platform that provide the political guidance for the reform to be happening, and that will have a lasting impact on in the multilateral trading system. When it comes to environment, we are pushing into 2 initiatives. One of them in terms of the coral reef. As you know, we have one of the most beautiful coral reef in the Red Sea that have been resilient to the climate change and the rising temperature and so forth. And therefore, we are pushing to establish a coral reef R&D platform into that area. When it comes to the land aggregation, which is basically a nature sink solution when it comes to the climate change, also we are pushing another initiative there to be established, which will be a lasting legacy for for Saudi Arabia. So these, in a nutshell, are initiatives that, with the support of the G20, we were able to have a discussion on them. We are looking forward for the final endorsement from the leaders on November 22nd. And this is how we can maintain the legacy of the 2020 G20 presidency.
Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Riam, I'll touch on tourism at this stage because I know that in your role, you've had some involvement with this as part of the G20 team. Tourism, as we all know, is a key dimension of economic development in the Gulf, in Europe, and indeed in many other parts of the world. So given the major impact that COVID has had on travel and on tourism, what, in your view, should the G20 see as the next essential steps for supporting safe tourism?
Thank you for that question.
Not at all. And if you can answer this, you'll solve the problems of the world.
Definitely, yes. But as you mentioned, the travel and tourism sector is one of the most heavily impacted sectors by the COVID-19 pandemic, with an estimated 70% decline in international tourism just this year alone. It's also unfortunate that, well, since I've been talking about women's empowerment, that 54% of the sector is workforce are women, compared to the 39% of the overall broader academy. I think a key part of tourism is increasing its resilience. And actually tourism, this year, the tourism agenda has focused on, as you said, safe and seamless travel. And they've also looked at inclusive community development. With regards to safe and seamless travel, they've had a huge discussion on technology. And actually that goes back to Dr. Sammy's point on how technology and inclusivity works within these different sectors. With regards to recognizing the importance of inclusive labor markets and social protections. They were able to the tourism ministers were able to commit to sustainable and inclusive tourism. They released 2 guidelines. The first one was the guidelines for inclusive community development through tourism, which empowers people, especially women, and focuses on and they had a report that serves as a guide for countries to ensure that tourism contributes to sustainable and inclusive development. The second one was safe and seamless travel, and focuses on, through technology, how can you enable safe and seamless travel in the long run, both of which fed into more resilient sector. I hope that answers your question in a nutshell.
No, that's extremely good. Thank you very much indeed. It certainly does. And I'll just go briefly to Peter and to Sammy. And to start with Peter, just very briefly, you mentioned some of the very positive outcomes of the G20 presidency, as Saudi G20 presidency, from your perspective, and as we view it from Europe, say. What, in your view, could be a positive or a number of positive knock-on effects of the Saudi Arabian presidency for the MENA region, say from the GCC or the wider MENA region?
This is actually a very good question, John, because parts of the MENA region are actually among the least integrated regions that we know on the planet. So more cooperation would definitely be necessary, would definitely be good to develop. And on the Arabian Peninsula with the GCC, there is a format that has been developed very far. So the question is whether it will be possible to have positive effects on more cooperation, both in parts of the region, but maybe also in those parts of the region where this has been actually really a weak point so far. So the question would be whether it's possible to have a sort of transmission of this notion that more cooperation on difficult challenges that are shared in the region, like for instance climate change, would not be beneficial in the short and medium term to be much strengthened. So here is actually an expectation, and then of course this expectation from a European point of view would also touch upon the very important topics that the engagement groups dealt with, I looked into some of the results, and there was a lot of good ideas that could actually transpire also in the work, in the cooperation in the region, like for instance the question of social contract, the question of young people, of course women empowerment that was addressed by Dr. Riam Al Rassi. All of these topics actually would really urgently need to be worked on at the regional level as well. And here, of course, Saudi Arabia could, well beyond the presidency, aspire to a special role to see to it that this continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. And Sammy, finally to you, just for say a relatively brief answer. I know you could speak about this for a week, but it's the whole question of the major negative impact that COVID-19 has had on educational opportunities across the globe, and particularly for the more vulnerable populations that you've described already in other contexts, with little or no access to technology-enabled learning infrastructure. What actions do you think that maybe the G20 should propose now, or that countries should take to ensure access to sustainable education for all in a post-COVID world? I know it's the ideal situation, will probably never happen, but just in summary, what would your view on that be, please?
So I would call for a massive plan to connect all schools in the world, all students to the internet. So to make every school in the world a hotspot. And this could also mean that revisiting the way curricula are developed and the way that the delivery of education is done. So it could become more hybrid in terms of forms, more distributed. You could be taught by a teacher in London while you're based in Jeddah, or vice versa. Okay, so we could take a whole new and fresh look at how education as a service is delivered, and then to disentangle the location of the students, where they are, and the quality and the mode, the quality of education and the mode of delivery. I think the G20 is in a very good place to do so. They do need to invest. They have all, as Dr. Abdullah said, they've allocated more than $11 trillion in investment to stimulate the global economy in the post-COVID-19 era, and they could allocate $1 trillion of the 11 to connect all schools and students in the world to the internet. And by doing that, they are also securing themselves a very good chance of faster economic recovery and economic growth and expansion. And they can reach then to these places in the world that currently we have no access to them.
Thank you very much. There are dozens of more questions that I would love to ask, but it'll have to be for another time at this stage, because time unfortunately has run out on us. And I have found this to be an extremely stimulating, interesting discussion and session. And on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Bussola Institute, and on my own behalf, I really want to warmly thank everybody involved in today's webinar. My very special thanks to Dr. Abdullah, Dr. Riam, Dr. Peter, and Dr. Sami. I thank each one of the four of you most sincerely for what I would regard as today's engaging and enlightening discussion, and for sharing with us your frank views and your insightful analyses. I know, Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Riam, from conversation I had with you earlier in the week, and indeed from today, that you're both extraordinarily busy these days. And I can only say things will probably get worse for the next week as you prepare for the Leaders Summit, and which will take place virtually, as we know, on the 21st and 22nd of this month. So I really do appreciate the time that you invested in today's webinar and indeed in our previous conversation earlier in the week. I'm also very grateful to all of our attendees for attending today's webinar. And we've quite a large number of people out there looking at you and who've been with us today. And I feel sure and certain that everybody involved will join with me and with the entire Bussola team in wishing next week's G20 Leaders Summit every success. So the very best of luck to you for the summit itself. And I just want to finally thank my own team, the Bussola team, and in particular Jihan, who hides behind the Bussola logo there and who's controlling the entire operation. I also, of course, want to thank very, very sincerely His Excellency Ambassador Dr Alarify for joining us this morning and for wishing the whole proceedings well. So thank you all very much. And I hope Dr. Riam and Dr. Abdullah, when you visit Brussels at some stage, that you'll visit us in Bussola. So thank you all very much. Thanks a lot.